Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on using sports diplomacy to score business outcomes. My name is Liz Griffin and I am the Executive Director of the Australia Korea Business Council. It is my pleasure to moderate today's session. Today's webinar is the first of two webinars that we will be holding on this topic of sports diplomacy. And as an outcome of these webinars, AKBC will be writing a report that summarises some of the key points, discussions and themes arising from these two webinars. We would also like to invite you, if you are doing something at the forefront of Australia-Korea sports diplomacy, to get in touch with us so that you can contribute to this report. It's very pleasing to see that we've had such a huge response to this webinar. At last count, I think we were up to about 90 registrations, but more importantly, it's great to see that we've had such a diverse interest from participants from different industry sectors, from the pharmaceutical sector to the telecommunications sector to all three levels of government. And so it's great to see that we've had such a huge response, so thank you. As quite a few people are new to AKBC, I thought I'd start by providing just a little bit of an introduction to who we are and what we do. The AKBC is a not-for-profit, member-based organisation that helps our members succeed in Korea and also promote the two-way trade and investment relationship between Australia and Korea. Our chairman is the Honourable Simon Crean, and we have 16 senior executives that support him as members of the board. We are a national body and have 80 members across all states and territories in Australia. So back to the topic of today, sports diplomacy. Well, what is sports diplomacy? Put simply, sports diplomacy is the notion of strategically using this power of sports to advance government or business interests. Sports diplomacy is a soft power tool to promote our national brand, advance our national interests, protect Australia's values and identity, and to serve as a bridge between people. As Nelson Mandela said, sports has the power to unite people like little else does. Essentially, it's a universal language. And one thing that both Australia and Korea have in common is our mutual love of sports. So I think this topic of sports diplomacy is very relevant to the Australia-Korea bilateral relationship. And hopefully this webinar will encourage more businesses and governments to use sports more effectively to promote our business or government outcomes. Today, I'm extremely excited that we have three fantastic speakers who will each speak for approximately 10 minutes each. Following these speeches, I will open it up to Q&A and ask that you please type your questions in the Zoom webinar chat. And when you do ask your question, please also identify who you are addressing the question to. To conclude, we will have some closing remarks from Trent Smythe, who is an expert in this field. So thank you very much to our four speakers that we have lined up for today. Before I introduce our first speaker, I would like to acknowledge and thank one of our supporters of today's event, which is the Australia-Korea Foundation. For those of you who are unaware, the Australia-Korea Foundation, or AKF, offers annual grant funding to organisations or individuals to support projects or activities that advance Australia's engagement with Korea. We are hoping that the next grant round will open in the second half of this year. So I do encourage that if you are interested to please either contact me and I can introduce you to the relevant person, or just keep an eye on the website. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Cam Vale, CEO of Baseball Australia. Over to you, Cam.
Thanks, Liz. I've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to talk you through a range of issues pretty quickly. And being it's a Friday, being I'm the baseball guy and being I work in sport and we're great at self-promoting, I've got a prop. So I'm going to put on the baseball cap for this, which is my Geelong Korea GK cap for today's presentation. So why Australian baseball in Korea? With a couple of key reasons of why we went into to this sports diplomacy around Korea. Firstly, for those of you who don't know, is the size of Korean baseball is significant. It's along with football would probably be the two biggest sports in Korea. About 7 million people go to Korean baseball each year to their 10-team competition. Their broadcast rights are worth more than $100 million. And Korea is the third biggest baseball country in the world behind the US and Japan. The second reason is that as much as baseball is a summer sport in Australia, our Australian Baseball League is played over the summer months. We effectively see an opportunity as the off-season winter league to support the bigger professional baseball countries like Korea, in this case, during our season. So we feel that we complement, as a smaller, developing, but still very sophisticated baseball country, by playing our off-season league for their competition through November to January, that there's some great synergies. And the third one is that, like a lot of sport throughout Asia, it's a different business model, and the 10 professional teams in the Korean Baseball League, the KBO, are all owned by major conglomerations. So LG Twins and Samsung Lions are two well-known brands, if you like, that own baseball teams. But companies like Doosan and Hanwha that are also enormous conglomerates, major businesses with major involved in many, many different industries, own these baseball teams. So where we first saw the sports diplomacy piece is really coming from how we can connect the ownership of the Korean baseball teams through what we're doing here in Australia back to government and to business. And how we've gone about it is two really key initial outcomes. The first one is Geelong Korea. So Geelong Korea is an all-Korean team that is playing in our Australian Baseball League. They've been in the competition for the last 2 seasons, backed by a sports marketing group in Korea. And it's the first in a Korean sport for an all-Korean team to be based in another country for a domestic competition. It's the first, if we exclude New Zealand from these examples, certainly from an Asian side, into Australian sport. So, and this all-Korean team plays in the city of Geelong, that I think everyone on this conference would know about. They play 40 games in our competition, 20 home, 20 away. And they produce all 40 games back to Korean television on MBC, which has been a significant outcome for us, which I'll touch on in a second. The second key outcome is to invite the Korean professional teams to do their spring training camps, which occur for them in the month of February to Australia. And last year we had, or this current year, this last summer in February, we had 3 teams, one in Sydney, one in Adelaide, and the biggest Korean professional team, the Doosan Bears, in Geelong. So a spring training camp involves about 80 players and staff of the professional team, which also includes about 10 of their media department. And then through that camp, which runs for about 21, 22 days, the Korean baseball media also covers it. And this year we had the Doosan Bears play our national team. And for a comparison, they're like the New York Yankees of Korean baseball, the Brisbane Broncos of the NRL, the Collingwood Magpies of the AFL. They really are the biggest player in Korean baseball based in Seoul, and it was a huge coup for us to have that. And these two outcomes, Geelong Korea and Doosan, have both been achieved through the support of the Victorian government. So through different arms of government, but mainly through Visit Victoria and Sport and Rec. Both of these initiatives have been backed by the Victorian government, which is the first step in this sports diplomacy outcome. So for us, we're only 18 months, 2 years in, but already the 40 games that have been produced and part of the competition have led to us achieving a broadcast deal with Fox Sports and Kayo. So again, these games are produced at a TV standard that all we need to do is convert to English, and we have product to support building a partnership with Kayo. The exposure in this last season of both Doosan and Geelong Korea, in very rough numbers, if I round down, is about 20 million people in Korea watched the Geelong Korean team or Doosan Bears play, or through videos of highlights, behind the scenes content. And interestingly, around 40% of that 20 million figure is the live content, and 60% is around highlights and the vignettes and the behind the scenes content, showing a real appetite to build a story and a narrative that is also beyond just the live content, and something that we've learned in even how we can better support our partners and sponsors to delivering those outcomes. In simple terms as well, this saved the Australian Baseball League. If Geelong Korea didn't come in 2 years ago, there probably wouldn't be an Australian Baseball League. We were losing around $1 million in running the competition. We had to privatise all the teams. And of the other 7 teams that have come into the competition through private ownership, at least 5 of those 7 directly came in because of the chance of pushing and building a product into Asia, and the fact that we already had Geelong Korea as one of those signed up teams. So no matter what happens, they've been a huge part in saving the National League, which is critical for our development, like most of you know, with sporting leagues. And for us, from a baseball side, it's increased the standard of the ABL, and it's increased our awareness of our main aim is to make the ABL the #1 winter league to the United States, Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. So to the sports diplomacy outcomes, there's 2 that really jump out, and then I'll wrap up with a few observations. Firstly, with the Victorian government, as I said, who've been a significant partner in this. And this is just one example. Last year, Asiana Airlines started or did a trial program of direct flights from Seoul to Melbourne once a week for 12 weeks, largely through the summer months. That's a big outcome for the Victorian government in obviously trying to pursue having regular international flights from Korea to Melbourne, direct flights that hadn't been occurring for some time. For us, if we didn't have that, Doosan Bears wouldn't have signed up. One of their key commitments to their spring training camp was the direct flight from Seoul to Melbourne. So that allowed us to build on the back of Geelong Korea, that the government was already supporting their push to get the direct flights. We then promoted Asiana Airlines through our broadcast of those games. But in very simple terms, what baseball is trying to achieve and what sports diplomacy should be trying to achieve is being a supporting partner, not the major partner, not the major driver, but being a key supporting partner in delivering a more significant outcome that is way beyond the baseball piece or the sports piece. But for us to have Doosan as potentially a long-term partner in the facility in Geelong and what we're trying to do with our spring training camps in the ABL, baseball's already winning. We're getting massive wins out of this and really giving a true win for government beyond the initial exposure and other outcomes that I think sport is quite good at delivering now. But sports diplomacy is above economic activity and exposure that we do through tourism activities. And the second sports diplomacy outcome that's starting to build has been our partnership with Deakin University, and who've been, again, a great contributor for 2 years into our partnership with what we're trying to do through our Australian Korean business. So they're a sponsor of Geelong Korea. They're involved in supporting the Doosan camp. We have the Geelong Korean team stay at the residence at Deakin University, and clearly there's a push to build the international student piece. But again, beyond that, there's opportunities to engage in faculties and other areas of Deakin that hopefully would tie them back to a company and a business like Doosan, whether that's in engineering or all sorts of other areas that we'd love to develop, is something that we're very keen to push. Hanwha is a company that is looking to potentially be a major player in Australia, and Hanwha are again one of those teams that are interested in sending players to the Geelong Korean team, having a camp in Australia. They had a small camp in Canberra earlier this year. So we're already seeing some of these immediate outcomes 2 years into sports diplomacy, if you like, from what is still at its heart a very business, baseball, commercial partnership that we're trying to build. And to wrap up my 10 minutes, just some observations that I've learned as a CEO in this space that I think would be really important, that I think some of the other speakers will touch on as well. Building trust in this is really important. This is beyond the transactional and the operational nature of what a lot of sport is about. Very direct outcomes when it comes to selling sponsorship and delivering commercial returns around events and all sorts of other partners. Sports diplomacy is much deeper than that. It's much harder than that, but the outcomes, I think, are going to be more significant if they can be achieved. And building that trust is really important. And this is a very simple example. We had the CEO of Doosan, the conglomerate, visit Australia for literally 48 hours. We weren't able to get the government meeting teed up. No one's fault, but with the help of government, we were well aware that the CEO is a big golf fan and put out a very second-hand request that, geez, he'd love to be able to play at Royal Melbourne where the President's Cup had been held, thinking it was beyond the reach of the humble little Baseball Australia trying to run the spring training camp and what it might mean to get him on that course. And with the help of government and ourselves, we were able to turn it around relatively quickly. And to be frank, it was a relatively easy outcome for us to deliver. But from that moment, the level of trust that was enhanced, the nature of our engagement with Doosan it had been very professional and very good, but almost stepped up to the next level. It was very personal after that. The fact that we've been able to deliver this major outcome of a round of golf at Royal Melbourne to the CEO of Doosan, that I will never know how important that is, but I know it's important, and it's going to play a part in our relationship with Doosan moving forward. Another observation is the patience that's required in this. It's very important to look at sports diplomacy to long-term outcomes. We're getting great wins early on, but the real success of this might be 5 to 10 years down the track. And I have to keep leading our stakeholders. They're generally pretty good, but at times away from just it's a logo, it's a sponsorship, into it's going to take time to get those big significant outcomes that embed Korean baseball into Australian baseball. Because if that happens, and that's sustainable for the long term, Australian baseball will fly and we'll move from a second tier, third tier sport into a very commercial, strong product in this country, which is our aim and our core purpose on the back of sports diplomacy. So that patience and commitment is important. A very small little win that we've had in the last couple of months has been to secure umpires from the KBO into our competition for this coming season. And to all the umpires out there, I love you. You're very important, but you're not the glamorous, exciting part of sport. But in that trust and commitment from us, Baseball Australia, back to the KBO, taking on KBO umpires into our competition will be very important in embedding the outcomes that we really want to achieve through all of this. Very quickly, Korea is part of Asia. We have a strategy around Asia, but it's not just a one-size-fits-all. How we are dealing with Korea is different to how we're dealing with Japan and Taiwan, even though there are some synergies across all three. So anyone in this sports diplomacy space, don't just do a broad brush Asia strategy and think it applies equally across all. It doesn't. You have to be very targeted in how you go about it. Last 2 points very quickly. Sports diplomacy is one of the most creative spaces I've ever been involved in my 20 years in sports administration. It's an exciting area. It's a challenging area. It shouldn't be seen as easy, but the opportunities for the sports that have an international profile like baseball but struggle with a domestic profile here in Australia, they are enormous. But you've got to think differently. You've got to really think about how sport is part of the solution, but it's not the only solution. But it is about win-win-win. It's 1 + 1 + 1 will equal 9, so to speak. And if you can get into that mindset, there's opportunities for all sports across countries that match up to the outcomes that you want in your area and what makes sense. And lastly, the part of that holy grail for me is to work even closer with government beyond just the tourism and the sport and rec and those parts of government. Trade and investment is, I think, where the biggest outcomes lie. We've seen just huge ways forward that we can help develop opportunities, but we're not the experts in defence and military and some of these areas that could be significant into the partnerships that we want to achieve. But it's my responsibility to keep digging and keep pushing and keep trying to find ways to bring the baseball outcomes to bigger government and business wins that sports diplomacy is all about. And I think I've gone over, Liz. Sorry about that. I forgot to put the stopwatch on.
No worries. Thank you so much, Cam. And that's a great synopsis of what you guys are doing at Baseball Australia with Geelong Korea. So thanks very much for sharing some thoughts and insights there. Just two things I wanted to pick up on. One was the spring training camps. I think that's a really good opportunity between Australia and Korea, given that we have opposite seasons, not only for baseball, but I'm sure there's plenty other sports, whether it be golf or football or baseball, to bring Koreans down to Australia during their winter months of December, Jan, Feb, down to Australia. I think it's one of the best times to visit Australia, to allow them to come and do some of their training in Australia. So that's great to see that you've already implemented that. And the second one is just the ongoing issue, I guess, of direct flights. We've now been successful. Obviously, we've got direct flights to and from Sydney and more recently Brisbane and now Gold Coast. It'd be great to see the Melbourne direct flight become permanent, a permanent flight with Asiana. So thank you for supporting that. And I'm sure there's plenty of other businesses in Melbourne that are hoping that we can ensure that this direct flight is a permanent fixture. All right, I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, Andrew Bolton, the CEO of Rostify. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. And thanks to Liz and the Australia Korea Business Council for allowing Cam, Bruce, Trent and myself to be part of this panel today. Baseball and football, they're well-established sports in our communities, from the playing in schoolyards, growing up in the neighbourhoods with family and friends, and emulating our heroes with dreams of the big leagues. But also emerging between us is the appetite and audience for esports and gaming. Korea, well-established, best internet speeds, amazing celebration culture with the K-barbecue. Their players are so good. The recognisability for the Korean players to keep grinding where they play in blocks of 16 hours, it's created a culture of intense competitiveness that's deeply ingrained. Yet around it, the Korean market has been very successful with getting support from telcos like SKT1. It's being a major driver in gaining mainstream acceptance. However, between the countries in esport and gaming, there is a vast difference in ability, and that's something which Australians are aspiring to. And part of it at the moment has been due to the volume of time spent in mastering the game. But to set an understanding, esports is related to the competitive side of the realm. And that can be professional or social, whereas gaming is more casual. And sometimes the game types might cross over where it can become competitive. But the serious intent overall is very much like passing the ball around, evading a tackle and getting in position to score. Between us with esports, there are two major formats between our communities that stand out: League of Legends and StarCraft. And Korea recognises the masters from this, and a strong mutual respect has been established between us. Firstly, League of Legends, a multiplayer online battle arena video game. It's a game of strategy, skill and teamwork, and developed by Riot Games. But the players, they control champions which have special abilities, and they battle against each other's teams. And the goal is to destroy the other team's nexus, or their main base. And as the game is played, the champion strength level is increased through kills and experience. League of Legends is the most played game at PC Bangs in Korea, with a 50% play rate overall. And there are superstars. So Faker is the highest ranked player with career earnings of more than 1.2 million. And he's an idol to many here, along with Duke. All gamers professionally have two names. In 2018, Faker played at a League of Legends tournament in Vegas as a pro-am, and an up-and-coming Australian star in Parbu actually was able to beat him in a split, which caused a lot of excitement back here in the community. Not dissimilar to Cam's experience before about the training camps, teams from Australia have sent League of Legends players to boot camp in Korea, and Avant Gaming is one of those where they suggested that the immediate improvement in a player is more than 20% just from being in that environment. So from a player perspective, it's a development experience, not much different to a football academy for FC Barcelona or Bayern Munich. However, to be able to engage further, these relationships, there's starting to be a greater awareness from improvement gains from the knowledge that we have here in Australia. So things like sports science methods for diet, physical activity, mental health and well-being. And in Australia also, League of Legends and esports has started to attract teams and partnerships from across the spectrum of appeal to both our cultures. Football clubs, Adelaide and Essendon. There's been feature events held by Tennis Australia, the NRL, universities and RMIT, University of Queensland, Swinburne. University of Queensland now have a dedicated esports academy program linked to their academic activities. And sponsors like in electronics and fast food in Hungry Jack's and JB Hi-Fi. But that's not different to what we're seeing across the globe, and where Korea is being a major factor in attracting global sponsors of significance: Oppo, MasterCard, Red Bull, Coca-Cola and Toyota. Around that though, which is common to both of us, are events, and some would regard that events is a new engagement strategy to create a new battleground for fans. And Tennis Australia are globally recognised as iconic and innovative, and Kia have been a valued partner and supporter of the growth. The Australian Open event continues to evolve and innovate around a changing landscape, becoming leisure more than tennis. And it continues to track as being the best attended tennis tournament in the world, being number one amongst the Grand Slams since 2015. Yet some of the recent growth in 2018 has come from the relationship with sponsors like Kia. A 5-year, $85 million partnership is one of the most lucrative across our landscape here. Yet in 2019, this allowed the Australian Open to partner with Epic Games and delivered a fortnight event over the weekend of the AO Finals. And to quote Craig Tiley from Tennis Australia, we're proud of our reputation for delivering world-class events and are always looking at new opportunities to reach more people with our partners. The fortnight Summer Smash at the Australian Open will see some of the best gamers from around the country do battle for a prize pool of $500,000 and play on a Pro-Am on Margaret Court Arena. The Pro-Am included existing professional players like Jesse Eckley from Brisbane, who won the solos, 100K first prize money. But he played alongside celebrities like Dr. Lupo from Nebraska, who on the social platforms have got the Holy Trinity. He's got millions of followers, no matter what platform he is. But some of the facts that came out of the Summer Smash event, which Kia played a part of, there's more than 1,500 gamers took part from around Australia who registered within 10 minutes to play that event. 500 people took part in the qualifying. 100 contestants took part in the solos, of which Jesse won the first prize of 100,000. The 50 fortnight gamers and celebrities from Australia, Canada, Japan, Korea, Great Britain played a Pro-Am charity event, no different to a golf Pro-Am. And it just was an example where it innovated deeply outside of its traditional demographic to uncover new fans, and a willingness to sort of partner rather than view outsiders as a threat, and to enhance the scale of interest overall. And one point, at the peak point of the event, eyeballs across television and digital streams at a maximum, they were able to draw on their own talent with Nick Kyrgios, who was playing he's a Call of Duty fan, apart from being a tennis player. But it's another channel to create interest around an iconic event. But finally, from a social and community perspective, traditional games like football through FIFA, they're gaining in scale and supported by E-Leagues. And the E-League, particularly in Australia, is something that the FFA has done exceptionally well since they brought it into place the last 3 years. FIFA Online 3 was already a massive hit in Korea. It was the number one online sports game based on traffic and revenue, because Koreans are notoriously, they're crazy about their football, and it shows in their passion for the sport there. One of the progression things was FIFA Online 3 was able to transfer into FIFA Online 4, creating a continuity just as traditional sports operate in seasons, so bringing their players through with them based around the traditional format of the game. And the new FIFA Online 4 season opened with the Champions Cup in Korea in December in 2019, with 12 teams from 7 different countries competing. So esports and gaming, it's a really positive, established and welcoming binding element between our two countries, which is only going to continue to flourish and grow. So with that, Liz, now I'm going to throw to the most impressive Bruce Dutay, who I'm hoping will share the story as to why he wore the number 11 when he played with Suwon Football Club in Korea. Thank you.
Am I good to go, guys?
Yep. Off you go.
So why I wore the number 11 in Suwon is before the season started, and this has stuck with me as I'm about to show you all. Everyone in the team got a $2 US dollar bill I don't know if you guys can see. And it ended the code there with the number of your jersey. I got this bill in 2016, so 4 years ago, and I still carry it in my wallet today. They told me it was for good luck. So it stays with me every day, and it's only when Liz and the Australia Career Business Council asked me to speak on this platform that, you know, I just opened up my wallet and remembered it was there, but it does stay with me every day. Look, I want to get into it now, and just to start with, I can't emphasize enough the importance of sports diplomacy. I've had the opportunity to go to a number of Australian embassies all around the world. I've played in Turkey, in Ankara, been to the embassy there for various functions, in Indonesia, the Consul General in Bali and Makassar, in China as well, and Korea. My time there was the best of the lot. I lived in Suwon for 2 years. I played for Suwon FC, a team that is owned by the city. So the mayor of Suwon is the president of Suwon FC, the club. Reiterating a bit what Cam said, there's so much corporate support also for baseball, definitely, as well as football in Korea. You know, some of the biggest Korean conglomerates own football clubs. Samsung have Suwon Samsung, Hyundai have Jeonbuk and other clubs. So there's POSCO have Pohang Steelers. So there's a lot of connectivity there between sport and corporates. And, you know, the names I'm saying now, then they're household names worldwide. You know, these are huge organizations. So they see the value in sport and playing in competitions like the Asian Champions League and what have you, brings a lot of exposure, especially in Asia, to those organizations. So there's no doubt that I think all of us on this webinar will agree that sport does break down a huge amount of barriers and can be used and leveraged immensely to get greater outcomes. My experience in Korea and Asia in general is that they're not interested all so much in transactional relationships. Building relationships is of utmost importance to them. And sport is a perfect platform to use in order to build those relationships. I think the tension in going to a meeting to negotiate a specific outcome versus the tension of, or lack of tension, in a corporate facility at a game that everyone loves to attend. They've got their favorite player, be it football, be it baseball, be it esports. You know, the ability to have free flowing, less formal discussions there does, in my experience, garner greater outcomes. I think that's a way that sport can be leveraged. I mean, Australian football teams go to Korea year in, year out. Korean football teams come to Australia year in, year out. Whether it's, you know, the Socceroos playing games, the Socceroos were in Korea not even that long ago, and Korea played in Brisbane not that long ago. So you've got the national team exposure, you got on men and women. The Korean women's team was out here last year playing in the tournament as well. So it's great to have the games. We all love watching sport. We all love the sport. But speaking to some of the other speakers' points earlier, it's also about how do you leverage the sport? You know, should there be, and I believe there should be, a bespoke strategic approach in fostering stronger relationships with a view to making a transaction later, whether that's attracting foreign direct investment, whether that's attracting international students, or whether that's exporting your goods and services to Korea. The benefit of sport is, it's its own language. I know from my own personal experience, going to a number of countries. When I went to Turkey, I didn't speak Turkish. When I went to Korea, I didn't speak Korean. But straight away, within the first, I would say, 2 to 3 hours of meeting my teammates and meeting the administration or the hierarchy at those respective clubs, it was very clear that I was one of them, because I'm a footballer, I'm involved in football, they're involved in football, we're all here for the same goal, we're all here to do the same thing. You'll learn the language along the way, but we all speak the most important and first language, which is football in my respect, and could be sport in a more broader sense. I think it's important, and Australia could do a better job in leveraging sport, because we're such a sport-loving nation and we're so bloody good at sports. I mean, for the population we have, our Olympic medal count's always fantastic. We always punch above our weight. We love being the underdog. And those values are shared very broadly in Asia, and specifically in Korea. The Koreans loved me and the other Australian players that have gone before me. We've had a number of successful Australians there before. We've got a number of successful Australians there at the moment, and we'll have a number of successful Australian sports people there in the future, because our values are shared. One of the first things I noticed is it's a very hierarchical society. Respect is probably number one there, and very close second to that is hard work. Doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're doing sport, whether it's academics, politics, whatever it is, they're extremely hard workers. And Australians by nature, especially in sport, work hard. Mentality is always very good. We work hard, we never give up. We're used to being the underdog and people not expecting great things from us, and we always punch above our weight. Koreans are very, very, the synergies in the culture there is very closely tied to Australia. And that's a reason, I think, for the great success we've had on the field over there. And, it gives me a lot of hope that we can have much more success off the field, whether it be in bilateral agreements that are mutually beneficial and provide mutually positive outcomes. So living in Korea was for me, in my experience, was fantastic. Of all the countries, and I've lived in about 5 or 6 throughout my life, Korea was the most enjoyable, bar none. It was the only country I'd lived in where I didn't really miss Australia. I didn't get homesick. I wasn't, counting down the days on the calendar when I can get back to see my family and friends. That's how exceptional the quality of life was over there. So in terms of people-to-people links and, the ability for Australians to go there, assimilate, integrate, or for Koreans to come here, I think that is of no barrier. I think, they're so welcoming, friendly society, very safe. And in sport, they're very similar to Australians. They're fanatical, they're passionate, they love their sport, they like their sports people, work hard. And I think, those synergies add value both on the field, but especially off the field. My disappointment comes in and this is specific to my sport, I'd like to emphasize that, but there seems to be a lack of engagement between football here and football in Korea, despite the fact that there's 2 or 3 Australian teams that go to Korea twice a year. There's 2 or 3 Korean teams that come into Australia a few times a year. And I think more can be done. And, I think it would be fantastic, whether it be the Football Federation of Australia or the respective clubs that are competing in these competitions, to work closely with Austrade, to work closely with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and whether it's strategically choosing people who've got interest already in Korea, or businesses that they know are trying to enter that market, businesses that are trying to get more foreign direct investment into their respective markets. I think if we can strategically find those people and through sport integrate them, get them meeting the right people on the other side, that is the start of relationships. And knowing that football is always a few times a year where you have an event here or an event in Korea, then you can build that long-term relationship. But it's not just about on the field. It's not just about sports people or business. I think whether it be medical, sports science, injury prevention, rehabilitation, the governance structures that govern our sports here versus their sports there, sports tech, coaching. There's so many, things that Australia does well that carefully imparting that advice on Koreans. Koreans are very advanced society. You need to avoid going there with this air of Australian exceptionalism and thinking, we do it this way and that's the best way to do it. They're not going to take too well to that. But I think if there's, that mutual respect and sharing of ideas, there's a lot of benefits that can also come from that. To wrap up, I just want to say on the back of the COVID-19 crisis that there is, I wouldn't say once in a lifetime, because I'm probably not old enough to say that sort of a statement, but I'll say there's a significant opportunity to be had here in Australia-Korea bilateral links and ties. I mean, the ability for the K-League, which is the domestic football competition in Korea, to broadcast their competition. They were the first COVID-19 hit nation to bring football back. I mean, the Premier League just went back this week. Korea's been back for 3 to 4 weeks. And that, while that's great for the clubs, it's great for the players. They get all this international exposure. It was streamed. ESPN picked it up. The sponsors would have been exceptionally happy with it. Samsung, Hyundai get their brands beamed all over the world. Well, that's fantastic. I think most importantly, as a first mover in the space, it showed what a fantastic country Korea was. Here's a country with tens of millions of people have gotten this virus under control quickly, and they're now showing the world and giving the world hope in the sense that, there's a lot of countries that were still in real crisis mode. Is this happening till 2021? Are we completely locked down? The mental health issues and the stresses that come with that, we've all felt it. Not too long ago, a couple of months ago, it was similar here. But to see that, hold on a second, here's a country pretty densely populated that have managed to get on top of this, and they're getting back to normal life. I mean, that was a fantastic advertisement for Korea as a nation and for sport, especially. With sport coming back in Australia and the A-League, in my respect, starting in the middle of July, I personally have been flooded with the requests from agents trying to get their players contracts here, because Australia is a safe place. In times of uncertainty, it's safe. Our foreign players here at Adelaide United have stayed in Adelaide. We have had no active cases for 20 odd days. They're speaking to family back home in Europe. They're still getting cases every day. They've still got a lot of restrictions there. So that's a fantastic advertisement for Australia and Korea. And I don't know, I'm not privy to exactly what's happening in the Prime Minister's office, but I'd be surprised if there's not a Australia-Korea travel bubble being discussed. Because here are two countries that they've gotten over coronavirus to a degree where travel becomes a reality again. So I just want to finish on that. and also emphasize, to Andrew's points earlier, the importance of esport. I mean, it's very hard to explain to Australians, the general public, how big esport is. But having lived in Korea, playing with professional footballers who'd prefer to watch esport gamers play each other than Man City play Man United in real life on TV. I mean, esport is that significant over there. The market is huge. And if we can get people's heads around that, I think esport is the next frontier. And when we talk about, you know, it's COVID proof, really, because you don't need to be in the same room as someone. You can do it all online. So there's a lot of avenues to go through. I think, you know, the pivot away from China makes Korea more strategic, more important strategic partner for us, especially when I think of the international student space. If we can get more Korean students, there's no doubt there's going to be less Chinese students coming. If we can get more Korean students in to fill that gap, that helps a lot. And, you know, I think it's all about getting the words out, not just the word, the message out there, you know, showing Australia, leveraging the ambassadors that we already have embedded there, whether it's footballers, whether it's e-gamers, whether it's baseballers, and other sports people, because in my experience, they've always been willing and able and proud Australians, you know, to tell everyone how fantastic Australia is.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bruce. Bruce, it's great to hear from someone who's actually lived in Korea and been a part of a Korean team. And I must agree with your observation that I think there is more that we can do with the AFC. And I guess one of the reasons that we decided to do this sports diplomacy topic was actually out of a little bit of frustration that I had when some of the Australian teams, 2 days before the Korean team was due to arrive, was asking for my assistance to kind of bring some element of business into it, which was disappointing from my perspective because it's such a great opportunity. And essentially, there's so much that we can do to bring business and sport together. But it appeared that perhaps it wasn't, you know, having a bespoke Korean strategy that included an element of business wasn't established significantly enough with these requests coming in very late. So I completely agree with you there, and I hope that perhaps as one of the outcomes again of this webinar will be that we can work more closely with those clubs to do more around this. We have, and I must say also, Bruce was on Q&A on Monday night and did an absolutely fantastic job. So I encourage everyone listening, if you haven't already listened to the Q&A session on Monday, which was focused on sports, to please look that up and have a listen. We have got quite a number of questions. I think it's unlikely that we're going to get through everything with 11 minutes remaining, but I will start with one from Joe Mullen to Andrew. Andrew, aside from the growth of esports and the generational pivot/access it provides, do you see a unique sports diplomacy aspect that can be gained through esports and digital over traditional sports engagement?
Absolutely, because we've got this great convergence of competition, social and academic, I suppose, growth and education. And I think it's a, you know, when you look at so many of the high level competitive professional esport teams, there is amongst the players and amongst the coaches and those who support them, there is no recognition of culture, colour, background, ethnicity at all. It's the most unifying experience that, well, Bruce, you're part of a panel on Monday night, and it's in the esports realm, what traditional sport is grappling with and trying to find a way, it seems to come naturally within the esports gaming ecosystem. So we can definitely learn from that. It's how we treat each other and how we play together and how we find our way to be better with each other.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Another question which I'll direct to Cam. Um, there have been tens of thousands of Koreans study in Australian universities. Are any of the sports engaging with the Korean students, either directly or through the universities, to engage in country and project the values and support the objectives and outcomes of these programs?
I'll just mute myself. Yeah, look, it's a really good question. Initially, for us, there probably wasn't that focus. So we're talking, as I sort of outlined, around the higher level professional teams and their business ownerships. But what has emerged has been interest from universities and high school teams to participate in Australia for camps and different competitions. So, we're even looking at it for our underage nationals, and extending our partnership, say, with a Deakin University to make sure that we use Geelong and put the student baseball teams into their accommodations. So it's a really good question, because when we started this, I didn't anticipate that would be an opportunity, but it's definitely there, and it all comes about. I think Bruce touched on it as well. Once you're starting to create this exposure, you're also showcasing the country and the cities and the regions that are on TV or part of it back to the Korean audience, and they're largely seeing a very positive examples of Australia and our various cities and regions, and that's where this interest has now come from universities and high schools. So I think it's definitely an area we'd like to do more in, and it's happening organically, which is really good.
Excellent, thank you very much. And I'll stay with you, Cam, if I can. Another question from Junsok Hong. As demonstrated by American fascination with the bat flip, one aspect of sports diplomacy is that each side learns something new about how it sees a particular sport, as well as another culture and society. How do you think Australia has recast baseball in a particular Australian way for the world, and vice versa?
Geez, that is a very good question. Very tricky question too. Look, I think I've understood the question right. Look, it's probably two things that jump out. Is number one, in Australia, we're often so influenced by the United States and Europe, and there's a real lack of awareness about Asian sport and the size and the significance of it. And Bruce touched on it, the footy part. Football part with coming back online. Baseball is the same. Korean baseball has been back up and running for a while. So what it does showcase is that Asian sport, and in this case Korean sport with football and baseball, is very significant. They have strong quality leagues. So what we've seen in our competition is definitely a significant increase in the standard of our league. And what we're also observing through Korean baseball is their tremendous use of technology, and how they come about, and even in this COVID-19 period, how they've engaged their audiences, whether it's with technology showcasing fans, crowd noise. I mean, again, I don't want to downplay what the AFL and the NRL are doing, but I would say that what's happened out of Asia has been very significant in those two sports, in the crowd noise and the different things we're seeing back here. So for us, I think the impact of Korean baseball and Australian baseball will still come over time. But look, what it has done too is showcase sport at its simplest. Is about rivalry. So the Geelong Korean team, when it plays Melbourne, the Melbourne Aces, another team in our competition, there's a rivalry between those two teams because it's Geelong versus Melbourne. And the fact that it's an all-Korean team playing in Geelong hasn't underplayed the fact that there is now an intense rivalry 2 years in between those two teams that you would naturally expect if Geelong played Melbourne or any inter-city or inter-state type competitions. And they're happy cheering a Korean baseball team because it's representing Geelong in our competition.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Cam. I do now acknowledge and recognise that we have a lot more questions that haven't been answered. So if you have identified yourself, what I will do is to ask each of the panellists to respond to you directly so that you do get an answer to your question. In closing, I'd now like to throw to Trent Smythe, who is the founder of the Sports Diplomacy Foundation and also the Secretary of the Consular Corps. So Trent, over to you for some closing remarks.
Hi Liz, and thanks very much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much to the Australian Korean Business Chamber of Commerce, Adelaide Footy Club, Rostify and Baseball Australia for putting this terrific presentation together. I must say, and it's interesting that we've still got so many questions coming through, and I was thinking as we were going through this presentation, so many people probably tuned in today to find out the answer to that question, what is sports diplomacy? And I'm afraid that you're probably no more necessarily aware than what when you started, but that's okay, that's a good thing. I think sports diplomacy, and the very point of it is that it is such a broad topic. Last year I was talking to a journalist and she asked me to talk about sports diplomacy, and I started talking about what RMIT are doing with their innovation hub at the Australian Formula One Grand Prix. I talked about Lockheed Martin and some of the initiatives that they have with sport, and she stopped me and she said, when I talked about sports diplomacy, Trent, I thought you were going to talk to me about rugby players going to Malawi or Australian football teams going to Papua New Guinea. And I said, well, absolutely. And that is also sports diplomacy. And I think that's the beauty of sports diplomacy, that it is the crossover between business, between community, between government, and between the sport and all of these parts of it. So I think importantly, today we've heard about, what sports diplomacy can do to build tourism. Bruce talked about, building relationships and the importance of trust in a relationship. But he also talked about sport as being that great leveler, very, very quickly. He said within minutes we were talking about football, and that really puts you on the same page. You talk about diversity and the ability to bind communities. You talk about governments and their agendas. So I think importantly, if you've come to this webinar today to ask what is sports diplomacy, the answer is it is really what you make it. Sports diplomacy is an opportunity for people to get in there and do something. As one of the great sports diplomats of our time, Dr. Stuart Murray from Bond University says that sports diplomacy is a new term, but describing a very old practice, the old practice of the unique power of sport to bring people together to achieve common outcomes. I think very much that's been the summary of what we've come to today. It's been an absolute pleasure being a part of this. And as I say, I think we've raised probably more questions than we've answered. But again, I think that's the unique power of sports diplomacy. Liz, I applaud you for this initiative. An incredible amount of work has gone into it, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be a part of it. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Trent. Thank you also to all of our panellists. You've done an amazing job in trying to explain what this sports diplomacy concept means. For all of our attendees, thank you very much for tuning in. Please do continue to engage with the Australia Korea Business Council, either directly through email, through social media. We've got a LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter account. So please do continue to engage us, and we hope that we can help you in your journey of sports diplomacy between Australia and Korea. Just one final reminder that we will have another seminar or webinar on sports diplomacy. So please do follow us on LinkedIn or on social media, as I mentioned, so that you can get the details of the next webinar. Until then, I hope everyone stays happy and healthy, and have a great Friday.